The New York State Department of Transportation presents the DOT POD.
And welcome into this week's edition of the DOT POD. I'm Josh Heller.
And I'm Anya Cardos.
And we are delighted to have you joining us. So, Anya, we're in this nice little sweet spot right now where it's getting warmer,
Yep.
but we have not reached the oppressive, humid heat, disgustingness that is soon to come. So we're in this night, and it's lighter out later, and I get home from work and I can go outside and do stuff and have fun and not come back a sweaty mess or anything like that. It's fantastic. It's a perfect time of year. I think this time of year lasts like a week, 2 weeks.
Yeah, right.
It's like an avocado.
And then it's bug season.
Yeah, It's like an avocado. It's perfect for like 30 seconds and then
Right.
not. But one of the best things to do, this time of year is to get outside, get active. And one of the best ways to do that, I love to do this with my son, is go for a bike ride.
Oh, we love it too. Me and my boys are the same. We love to just hop on the bikes
Yeah.
after school, get around the neighborhood, go grab an ice cream cone. You're
Nothing wrong
right.
with that.
It's the perfect time of year. So why not talk a little bit about what NYSDOT is doing to keep us safe and our communities connected?
No doubt
through
about
biking?
it. Month of May is National Bike Safety Month, and joining us for today's episode to talk about that and more is Karen Lorf. Karen is the State Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator here at the New York State Department of Transportation. Karen, thank you so much for taking some time and sitting with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So, Karen, I guess we'll first start out with, what is your position? What do you do here? And then tell us a little bit about your background and how you got here.
All right. So I am the New York State DOT State Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator, and I've been in that role for about 5 years now.
And so what does that role do? What responsibilities do you have, under that umbrella?
Yeah. So the term coordinator can mean a lot of different things, right?
That's for sure.
So what I've taken the role and what I've been supported within the department to do with the role is really look at how are we accommodating bicycle, pedestrians, and other forms of active transportation like scooters, like anything that is human powered. And how are we accommodating this on our roadway? Where are we doing it? How are we doing it? Are we doing it well? But also a lot of it is looking at our plans and our policies and saying at DOT, this is the goal that we want to achieve within our roadways. And are we meeting it? Are we achieving that goal? And if not, then trying to figure out what we could be doing different in order to do that.
So how did you get started in that? What is your background coming into to DOT?
So I'm a landscape architect. I had about 13 years of experience before coming to DOT. I came in as an entry-level landscape architect. So I worked in the main office design for about 13 years, which was a great experience because we got to work on projects in all the different regions. I got a really good understanding of our design process at DOT. And then about 5 years ago, the opportunity came up for the State Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator role. And I was looking at that. I'm like, I would love to do that. And I was lucky enough to get the job. And while in that position, I had the opportunity to take all that experience I had down in design and the process and really look at what are we achieving within our roadways. So I was lucky enough to have that design background to lead me into that. And then while in the Office of Traffic and Safety, where at that time the State Bike Ped Coordinator role was, I got a much broader perspective of the different roles some of the other pieces of the organization play into. So I was exposed to a lot more of the safety concerns. I interacted a lot more with planning, which plays a critical role of this. And I started realizing what this role is working with all the different pieces of the department. Because there's aspects of planning that you want to do, bicycle and pedestrian facility planning in, obviously. And then there's pieces of design about how does it get incorporated into our roadway design. And then there's also the pieces in traffic and safety is how does it deal with operations? How do we deal with our signals? So it's being able to have conversations with all those different work groups. And then working with construction, how do we deal with work zone traffic control? Working with maintenance, how do we make sure that we can maintain these facilities? So it's been a really interesting position for me because it has a piece of it in every single part of the department, and being able to work with all those different groups is great.
Let's get into specifics. What are some of the projects that you're most proud of and ways that NYSDOT is incorporating safety, bicycle safety, and pedestrian safety into these projects?
I think it would be a little bit hard for me to give you a physical project. I think what's been more interesting to me that I've been more proud of is we've been looking at our complete streets checklist. Mm-hmm. And it's more about, are we asking the right questions early on in the process to say, this is what this site needs? So it's a little bit more broad than that, than an actual project by project perspective.
Can you take a second and just let people know who might not know what complete streets are and what that checklist is and what the goals of that are?
So around 2011, a legislation was passed, and I'd have to check the dates on that, for New York State, saying that we had to consider complete streets, which means the street isn't just about the vehicle getting from point A to point B. It's these streets play a role within our communities. There are sidewalks. In some cases, there are front yards. They're the way that kids walk to school. They're the way that your mother, your elderly mother, might go to the post office and get out a little bit and see her neighbors. So they play a lot of different roles, and it's looking at it in its totality, not just as a way to get cars from point A to point B. So what the checklist does is a way for us to meet the requirements within that legislation that said you have to consider all these different aspects. So what we did is, with the checklist, when it was developed back then, it said, all right, did you consider what the context is? Did you consider what the pedestrian use might be? Did you consider all of these other pieces which make the design more complete? And so that's been in place for, about 15, 20 years now. And it seemed like it was time to revisit it and say, have our goals changed a little bit? Is the process working? Is there ways that we can tweak the process to make it more effective? So what we did is we got a whole group of different people together from all across the department to get all those different voices. And we said, okay, what's working? What's not working? What can we do better? And just really kind of trying to break that checklist down so we can make it meet the goals that we have from the department now to meet those active transportation goals and those community goals.
So you mentioned active transportation, and it's kind of a buzzy word, as it were. But talk about active transportation and what it means from a department standpoint, right? What we're looking to achieve there, and what it is kind of on I guess from a more practical standpoint, what it actually is.
So I sometimes wonder if we started using the term active transportation because saying bicycle and pedestrian was too long.
It's tough to throw out, it is.
But no, what active transportation does is it's looking at all of the human power modes. And I know that there's a little bit of confusion when we get into, say, like e-bikes or e-scooters, but primarily, in a lot of cases, they are human powered or they're just being a boost is being added to that human power. So it's kind of looking at that idea of micromobility, which is, like I said, it's rollerblading, it's riding your bike, it's walking, it's running, it's using a scooter, it's using an e-scooter, it's using an e-bike. And who knows what the future's gonna hold. But it's looking at those non-vehicular modes.
And what specifically are, the goals from a department standpoint of active transportation? I mean, obviously it's something that, that we support and we are working to help and improve and increase. What are those goals?
So I think the commissioner actually laid it out really good when she was involved in the CLCPA, which was the Climate Leadership Climate Protection Act. That's another acronym. I always have to double check. And a lot of that was focused on as a state, we can't meet our climate goals without implementing some form of mode shift, whether or not be using more public transportation, e-vehicles, and actually more walking and biking. And in order to achieve that, we need to have space on our roadway for those things, and we need to accommodate those.
How is this incorporated in first and last mile? Can you kind of explain what that is for folks who haven't heard that term before and what that kind of looks like? With bikes, different kinds of bikes. Talk about that.
Yeah, so first and last mile is the idea that we can't have mass transit get to everyone's front door. It's just not feasible. That's not the way mass transit works. So the idea is within that mile radius of a mass transit station, whether it be a CDTA bus, whether it be a train, whether it be Amtrak, if we can get people from that mile, from that all the way over to that train station, they will utilize it. But they have to be able to do it in a safe manner that feels safe and is comfortable. No one wants to, thread their way through something that feels dangerous in order to get to the train station. So that idea. And then at the station point, are they accommodating, say, a place to park your bike? Are they accommodating maybe a way to get your bike on the train or the bus? Because when you get off, you still have to get from that station back out again. And a nice thing that has been coming out of that is that partnership with like shared mobility. When we get into like you can rent a bike or you can, check out an e-bike or something like that, just to be able to get you sometimes that from the end station over to where you need to work or shop or live.
Well, as we mentioned, the weather is nice for the moment, and it is National Bike Safety Month. Talk a little bit, and I guess we can discuss this, but, it seems common sense, but, what are the responsibilities? And I guess we'll kind of look at it at twofold almost. The responsibilities of, those who are riding their bikes, but also the responsibilities of those who are driving and, need to make sure that the road is safe for everyone. And there are responsibilities on both sides to make sure that this kind of symbiotic relationship can work. Talk about that for me.
So there are rules of the road, and they are legislated. The bicycles right now are considered to be vehicles. They are obligated to obey the rules of the road. There's obligations for pedestrians to utilize crosswalks when they exist. Vehicles are obligated to yield to pedestrians within crosswalks, but that means it's a double-edged sword. Like you can't just jump into a crosswalk if you see a car coming because they're not going to be able to yield in time. But when a vehicle sees someone in a crosswalk, they also have to yield. So, and I think part of that then also gets back to manners. We talk a lot about the legislation and the rules of the road, but there's also manners involved. And part of what I've been hearing a lot lately from users of shared use paths, of shared use facilities, of trails, when we're combining bicycle and micromobility and pedestrians together, is that a lot of complaining, actually. The people that are walking saying, oh, the bicyclists, they're zooming by me and I didn't even know they're there. The bicyclists are complaining. People are walking with their dogs on a 30-foot leash and I go to pass them and, suddenly I'm getting tangled up in this leash. There's complaints from the bicyclists, well, when people are walking down the pathway, they're walking four abreast. I can't even get around them. So there's the other big complaint we hear is sometimes there's crosswalks that go across bike paths. And this does happen a little bit more in the city or in dense urban areas. And bicyclists don't stop for pedestrians in the crosswalk.
Right. They're vehicles at that point.
And they're vehicles at that point,
vehicles.
so they are obligated. But and I think a lot of it just comes down to just having better manners about it. Mm-hmm. I think there's been a lot more people that have suddenly started maybe exploring bicycle riding or scooter riding, and they're not aware of some of those rules, or they just haven't. The culture that in, say, like European countries, which trains kids from a young age up, like this is what you do on a bike path in order for us all to get along. Doesn't exist here maybe to the same point, but I think it's something that we just have to reinforce, because if everyone is treating everyone else respectfully, we'll all be able to use these facilities well.
Right.
And enjoy them.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because our boss, the director of the Office of Communications, Joe Morrissey, he mentioned the other day about going on a walk with his dog. And he really appreciated it when a cyclist came by and the cyclist said,
on your left.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's just like one of those common courtesy things. But he brought it up and said, it was great when somebody did that. That's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yes. Ringing a bell, maybe, beeping a horn, yelling out on your left. Being aware of each other and treating each other respectfully.
Right. Exactly.
I find it interesting, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, New York is such an interesting state, and you mentioned the differences between the urban versus the suburban, versus the rural, and really entire gamut. I mean, you're overseeing this, but the state it's different little microcosms, and there have to be challenges to each of them, and they have to be extraordinarily different from each other, where it's almost like, what's a problem in one place is not even, an issue in another. I mean, talk about the state as a whole and trying to figure this all out for a place that is so different from one side to the other and in the middle.
Well, yeah, and actually that kind of leads to a point where I didn't mention we need vehicles treating pedestrians and bicyclists also with a lot of respect. I do also get a lot of complaints where they don't know where to turn because they're riding their bike on a road and cars are not giving them any space, or they're throwing things at them, or they're yelling at them, or telling them that they don't belong on the roadway. And that's absolutely not the case. The bicyclist has just as much right to that roadway as you do as a vehicle, driving in a vehicle. And once more, that's also a respect thing. But I think that then speaks to a little bit of that difference between the urban and the rural and the suburban. In the rural, there's a lot more bicycle use because the distances are a little bit bigger. You do see people walking. It's usually a little bit more maybe for exercise or for enjoyment than it is as a mode of transportation. When you get into the more urban areas, you do see that a little bit more as a mode of transportation. And then there's also then the issues when you get into those rural areas. A lot of times we're constrained on our shoulder spaces by environmental concerns, whether or not there's wetlands there or there's habitat there that we don't want to get into. When we are in the urban context, we get into a little bit more of it's all been built out and how much right of way do we actually have. And then, like I said, the uses are different. The needs are a little bit different. But still in that rural area, that suburban area, you might have a teenager who wants to get a job so he can get a car, but he can't get to a job without a car. So you have some of those still needs that people need to have different sources in order to be able to get to either employment opportunities, school opportunities, or just be able to go about their daily business.
And not to put too sobering a point on it, but 2021, the most recent numbers from NHTSA, 966 bicyclists killed in traffic crashes in 2021, which is a 5% increase from 2020, and that's a terrifying thought.
It is terrifying. So part of that is it's driver inattention. It's the fact that some drivers don't realize that how much bigger their vehicles are, how much heavier they are. There's a huge difference if you impact, say accidents happen. You accidentally hit somebody at 30 miles an hour. Chances are they're going to be okay. It's not going to be a fatality. They might be seriously injured. It's not going to be a fatality. When it gets up to 40 miles an hour, it gets a lot more likely that it's going to be a fatality. So when you're driving in an area where you see people walking, you see people riding their bikes, it's really important to slow down because that makes a big difference. Especially, like I said, the vehicles are bigger, the hood heights are bigger, the way that they impact pedestrians or bicyclists is different. Sometimes it's actually hard to see over the hood in order to be able to see the beginning of a crosswalk, to even know that there might be somebody in there. So those are things to be aware of. But it's also then looking at how are we dividing up our cross-section. Then we look at that roadway. How much width are we giving to the vehicles to move? How much width are we giving to the bicyclists to move? How much width are we giving to the pedestrians to move? Because in some cases, it is safer if we separate them out. In some cases, we don't have enough right of way to do that. So how do we look then at mitigating that risk?
Yeah, that's very important. And letting people know, too, there is a difference when it comes to speed, and it could mean someone's life.
Yes.
So I'm glad that we're talking about it today and getting that word out. You and I were talking before we sat down here, and you say you're not necessarily an avid cyclist, but you do ride, and you were really informed by a trip to Germany. Talk a little bit about that, where there's a lot of cycling going on and there's a lot of micro transit.
I actually had the opportunity to live in Germany for a little over a year. My husband's German. So I was living in Berlin. They have an amazing setup for bicyclists. There's actually separated bike paths. And as a walker, as a pedestrian, when you're coming up to one, you stop and you look both ways when you cross a bicyclist path, also when you cross the roadway. So, and the same thing when the bicyclists see a stop sign or they see there's a pedestrian crossing, they stop. So there is a lot more respect that people have for each other in the different modes. A lot of times when I'd be riding my bike through the city, and I had to get into traffic in order to make a left-hand turn, I felt respected as a cyclist, that people were making space for me within the roadway. And I haven't always felt that here in the States. So there's a culture which is just intrinsically more respectful of the different modes. And part of that comes back from, education that they instill from, the lower grades all the way up through. But the other interesting thing is we look at like, Europe's different. We're never going to be able to achieve that. And they weren't that dissimilar from us 30 or 40 years ago. And they made a lot of cases they made a commitment to make a change. And they knew that it was going to take a while to achieve it. But they made that commitment. And then they made those changes piece by piece. And that's actually a pretty good lead into something that we're working on in the department, which is the Active Transportation Strategic Plan. And once more, upper management and the commissioner have given us a huge amount of support in order to be able to kick this off. But looking from a New York State perspective on our roadways of how do we start building networks and how do we do this in a logical way? And how do we do this in order to achieve results of providing mobility options for everybody. And like you said before, it's going to look different in an urban context. It's going to look different in a suburban context. It's going to look different in the rural context. In some cases, it's perfectly legitimate in order to mix bicyclists and vehicles on the roadway because the speeds are low or there's enough sight distance or the shoulder's wide. In some cases, it makes more sense to move it off to the side. It might be a side path. It might be a shared use path off to the side. It's a bike lane. It could be a separated bike lane where we have some sort of either vertical element, whether or not be, say, a barrier, it could be a post, or it could just be really wide markings in order just to provide that extra level of both comfort and safety for the users. So, I'm really excited about this active transportation plan that we're going to be working on. And it's not just looking at what we can do and where we can do it and how to leverage our dollars in a way that makes sense. And like I said, building networks, but also how do we do things within the department? What do we need to change policies or do we need to update some of our policies? Do we have a structure within the department that enables us to really make these considerations all throughout our process? And, what do we need to do to implement all that? And, what are some of the barriers that people are seeing or what are some of the great things that we're doing in one region that we could be doing in another region? So I'm really excited to be able to have some of those conversations, both internally and externally.
Here on the DOT POD, we like to ask our guests a question when we wrap up our show. Karen, what is your favorite DOT road trip and your favorite road trip and song?
Probably my favorite road trip to do on occasion is to drive over to Manchester, Vermont, which is, obviously I'm going outside of New York, so maybe that wasn't the most popular thing to say, but I really just enjoy going up through those back roads and making my way over to there. And there's a great bookstore, which is the End Destination, which is always nice.
Oh, nice.
And then the music, it changes from day to day. It could be, I'll listen to everything from, Jamiroquai, which is, a little bit old school kind of.
Oh, I love him. I love him.
It's like happy music, to listening to, Eminem on maybe a bad day. So like I said, the range is pretty wide and it really just depends on the day.
I like your taste. I gotta say.
Well, Karen, thank you so much. Obviously, with National Bike Safety Month going on, this is kind of prominent right now. But again, throughout the warmer months, it needs to be something that's constantly on people's minds whether they're driving or they're riding or they're walking.
Yeah, and the thing is just treat everybody with respect out there, and pay attention, slow down a little bit, and everybody will have a great spring and summer.
Right.
Works for me. So again, Karen, thanks so much for taking some time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Well, Anya, that's gonna about do it for us for here. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this edition of the DOT POD, especially our newer listeners. Feel free to drop us a line. Let us know what you think, a topic you might want to cover. Give us a rating if you'd like. We'd love to hear from you all. So another good one, Anya. Another apropos episode.
Yeah, definitely makes me want to hop on my bike, put my helmet on, and head out there with my boys.
I'm right with you. So again, thanks everyone for tuning on in. For Anya, I'm Josh. We'll be back right here on the DOT POD.